I'm Heather.
And I'm Desiree.
And you're listening to
the Perpetually Overdue Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Perpetually Overdue Podcast. I am Desiree.
And I'm Heather.
And this week is I was going to say the same thing, like
special episode.
Special or a fun episode. Those are the two things always said.
No, I think you should leave that in. Honestly, it is always a fun or special episode because we pick the topics and we like them.
So this week's topic is going to be very interesting because we're coming at it from two different angles, in the sense that we want to discuss the stigmas against certain genres in media, but specifically for me, books. And that is going to be the stigmas against horror novels and romance novels.
Could not be more opposite ends of the spectrum.
But interestingly enough, both have things that, the community go against, and people always have something to say, even though these genres have been around for decades, centuries, even yet they're put beneath other type of genres. And even when they have their moment in the sun because of a specific either series or made for movie TV, and obviously more of the public become aware of it, the backlash and the ignorance and all the fun people come out of the woodworks to talk against the genre. So Heather has become a huge fan of the horror. I was going to say the horror romance. That is a genre, but no. She's become a huge fan of the horror genre, has been reading a lot more of it, especially since she married her husband. And I have always been a lover of romance. I am a romance writer as well. So I am very much aware of the stigmas against that. You will hear from both of us on both of those subjects.
Let's give a little background to both genres and our experiences with them. For me, I actually, before I got married and my husband introduced me to horror, I was not into horror. And in fact, I was afraid of horror. Mostly movies. I'd never read any horror books, but I was very terrified. Like, I grew up terrified of the Candyman. That was like my main, to the point where I would shower with the curtain open and like staring at the mirror, worried that the Candyman was going to come out, even though you typically in the story you have to say his name a few times. But I was so scared of that movie. Even as an adult, when I watched the Blair Witch Project, I spent the night on my sister's uncomfortable tile floor because I was so terrified.
So ending traumatized me.
Oh my God, me too. So for the most part, I really wasn't into horror. And I kind of looked at horror in the same way that a lot of people did, which was that it was a lesser form of art, of artistic expression. And that it's just for shock value and the sort of the thrill, the adrenaline rush of the fear. And granted, I'm not going to sit here and act like some horror isn't like that. But aside from like a good slasher movie, I think that books get into something completely different. And even movies, if you look at like psychological horror. So once I started delving into that, my husband asked me to read one book in particular, which I talked about in a different episode, called Pen Pal, not the romance. It's an old Pen Pal book, and it was about a young boy who did a project in school where he had to write some sort of letter, and then they tied it to a balloon and they let the balloon go. And the person who found his letter was basically like a predator who began stalking him after that. And it gets really intense, really creepy, so good, but it was gripping,
Someone on YouTube, when you mentioned that, actually was like, that was the first horror your husband
really?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you saw it. I didn't know if you purposely didn't answer it because you didn't want to touch it. But yeah, they were like horrified that was the first horror book that he gave you as a recommendation.
It was intense. Honestly, it was jumping into the deep end, the 6 feet.
Oh, wow.
Because it was very psychologically driven. And that's kind of his thing. Like, he likes the horror that deals with a lot of trauma. And I've often asked him, like, what is so attractive about this? To be honest, as I have gotten more into the genre, I actually understand what is attractive about it, which I'll get into a little bit later. But not only did that book spark an entire love for a new genre, because before that it was mostly like YA, fantasy, sci-fi. I love action adventure type of story, and I usually typically needed there to be some sort of romance within it too, to keep it kind of interesting, because let's face it, a lot of the YA without the romance wouldn't be as interesting. But with horror, there was so much intrigue. It's kind of like how you feel about the suspense, that feeling of like wanting to figure it out, wanting to like uncover the intensity of it is very attractive. So I started reading it more. We started reading it together. And interspersed, I would read other genres, but I really, really fell in love to the point where I wrote my own short horror story that I'm still in the editing process of. But yeah, that's kind of just like my simple, very brief, honestly, because I've only been with my husband for almost 4 years now. So I've only been reading horror for like 3 years, because it took a minute. I wasn't jumping right into it right away.
I was in shock when I found out that like she really embraced the horror genre. I was like, really? But yeah.
Okay, I agree with that listener about that being like an intense first horror novel, but it's also so well written. It's also so gripping. Like, you need to know what happens next, that it is a good pick for that, because it allows you to see kind of the depths of where horror can go and to see if that's something that you're comfortable with. Because not all horror I'm comfortable with. You know, there are certain boundaries that I have. And with horror, you don't have, and this is something that you learned recently with me, there are no trigger warnings with horror. So whatever happens in the book, you better do your research, because if there is something like sexual assault, incest, gore, all of those things, they're not going to warn you ahead of time, because it's the genre. Like, when you go to a horror movie, you have the rating, but that's about it. You're going into it with a mindset of knowing that there's going to be some taboo things. So for me, even with movies, horror movies, there are certain things I do not engage in, I do not touch, but it allowed you to get a taste of how deep horror can go, but also at the same time, just really good writing and plot to keep you engaged the whole time and wanting more and like wanting to know what happens next all the way up to the very end. So it was a really good pick to be like, okay, I can do this. This is actually good. But that's my little brief history. What about you?
So with romance, it's something that's always attracted me from childhood, because I was ever the hopeless romantic. That has always been a huge part of my personality, even though ironically I didn't date much throughout my life, because I had a higher standard of like what I wanted, and later on in life learning that also I need more of an emotional connection that I would prefer to build through friendships and things like that, which is not common, obviously, in the dating world. And so it's pretty much like, I'm attracted to you. Let's see if this works. And that's it. And to my brain, it just doesn't work that way. I'm like, no, I'm not going to facilitate that risk nonsensically. Like, that's a waste of time. And so growing up, I just always was attracted to romance, obviously any type of romantic movies. Did occasionally sneak in books, and they were 9 times out of 10 romance, until I became more of an avid reader later on in life. And like Heather, when I became more of an avid reader, I was in YA dystopian, YA sci-fi. Those were the genres that really attracted me. But like Heather said, if the romance subplot wasn't strong, I didn't want to read it. Because really, at the end of the day, I loved the elements of like the world building and obviously the dangers and all that stuff. But at its core, I was focused on the romantic journey between these two characters. And so it was then a few years later, I started reading more romance, strictly romance books. And then that grew into writing more romance. Whereas even though I wrote sci-fi and young adult, I still wrote them with romantic subplots. And that was my focus. But now I transitioned into more actual romance genre books. And then within that, there's many variations and subgenres, which eventually led me to romantic suspense. As Heather was speaking about the suspense aspect earlier, I love romantic suspense. I love the dynamic of just the fear and the danger. And honestly, it helps perpetuate the romance as well. So I love that too. So anything that's going to aid, help that aspect of the story, then even more so, I love it. It's been a very long journey. Romance, I think, is such a huge part of who I am. And I have a very romantic notion about life and things that it's just what attracts me. More or less, that's kind of like a short version of my history with the romance genre.
I do remember you saying in a different episode when we were talking about the attraction of romance in YA, which sounds very similar to romance suspense, is that you liked the fact that the romance was quickened and helped along by the circumstances of the dystopian world in which most of the YA books that we read took place in. Is that the same kind of trigger? Does that happen with the romance suspense, where the suspense aspects of it kind of like push the romance like further faster?
Yeah, because as a lot of people who argue against the romance genre, one, the whole aspect that the argument is that it's unrealistic. It's fiction, people. Two, the fact that, it's not realistic how fast people fall in love and all that stuff. It almost feels justified even more so that these circumstances are pushing the pace of the romance between these two characters because they're needing to spend time together. Either there's protection going on, together they're working towards something.
And so they're spending more time together, and then
Exactly. And then obviously attraction's there from the beginning, like any other relationship, but the whole building of the actual getting to know each other, intimacy, etc.
What I find interesting is that it isn't unrealistic. Because let's be honest, a lot of people will meet someone, go to bed with them immediately, and either that is just a one-night stand or it turns into a full-blown relationship. No, maybe they're not like, I love you right away, but the physical aspect of their relationship, the attraction, the affection, that typically starts very quickly for a lot of people. There are not a ton of people, granted, everybody has their own standards, especially like we understand coming from a religious background, how that can aid in you wanting to take more time to get to know somebody. But that's not the case for a lot of people. And also, when you have romance as a subplot to literally anything, the first thing that popped into my head when you were talking, I have no idea why, Mission Impossible.
Okay.
Because the circumstances are so intense, right? Yeah. Like it's an action movie. They're saving the world. There's always been a love interest for Tom Cruise's character. And by the end of this 2-hour film, which probably takes place in the span of like a few days, maybe a week, because this is like saving the world type shit. He's already had sex with her. They're already in love. They're already in the midst of some sort of situationship or relationship. And nobody has an issue with that.
And you never see the girl again after that. Next movie, it's a new one.
A lot of the times, yes. So it's interesting to me. I mean, 007 is a huge, James Bond is a huge example of that, where it's a different woman every time. And nobody ever has an issue with that.
Well, that will be the point that we definitely tack on to later.
Yeah. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it's so men focused.
Exactly.
And so it's okay for a man to like be a player because he doesn't really have feelings for that woman. He's just using her sexually or to satisfy his needs or whatever like that. Which, by the way, a woman can too.
Absolutely.
So I do find that very interesting as far as what you said earlier about it happening so quickly. I'm like, in real world, it does happen like that too a lot of the times.
Usually by like the third date are like, okay, we're exclusive. And so it's like, that was what, 2 weeks total, maybe?
Yeah. And I mean, granted, everybody is different. The amount of time that you talk to them, the amount of time that you spend physically with them, the depths of your conversation, all of those things play a factor. But let's be honest, people, feelings develop quickly. They develop fast. Even if you don't say the words out loud, a lot of people know how they feel pretty early on.
And again, this is the thing with fiction. in novels, we have this many pages
Exactly.
to like create this entire relationship. There are going to be obviously some things that you're going to need to change, hence it's fiction and not real life. And
Yeah.
the fact that you can still tell a compelling story within those pages that still convince people that these two individual characters love each other, like each other, care about each other, whatever, and actually stay together. Like, that's a big thing to accomplish. And romance authors accomplish that all the time, every day, for decades.
And honestly, I think that the real accomplishment is keeping two characters together. That's probably the more unrealistic part if we're talking about how relationships actually function.
Exactly.
Is people staying together for the rest of their lives or even in a long-term relationship. So it's not so much the quickness of which they fall in love, because again, you can get physical without being in love. Surprise, people. Women can do that. We don't always have to have deep emotions to get physical.
No.
And for example, like you said earlier, you're the type of person that you like to have a deeper connection.
I almost
with someone.
need it. Yeah. Like, a part of me almost doesn't, it won't go there. It just can't unless I have that. Yeah.
So for somebody like yourself that has that need, it's not just a want, it's a need. The idea of getting physical with someone before those feelings are really developed, it's not even a place that you go. For somebody like myself, who I can have sex without feelings. I've talked about it in previous episodes. I've had casual relationships. I've had one-night stands. Never thought about the person again. I mean, maybe I would think about the situation again, but I'm not wondering, like, what are they doing? Do they think about me? Blah, 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 blah,
For
blah.
real.
And I think that that's really abnormal for people to think of women that way, especially because if you openly admit that, then you're a floozy, which is not the case.
Again, patriarchy, double standards, good times. So, Heather,
yes,
let's start with you. What are some stigmas that you have come across when it comes to the horror genre?
Well, I think just it being considered a lesser form of writing, of creative expression, of literature, not so much classic Gothic horror books like Frankenstein and some of those, Dracula, Interview with the Vampire. I think that those types of stories, because of the era in which they took place, don't get me wrong, brilliant writing, brilliant storytelling, but I think because they're classical literature, people accept them more as being like an elevated form of literature and writing. I think modern day horror, and things are starting to change, I will say that, in terms of the stigmas and stereotypes, but I think for a while people kind of took it as cheesy and very similar to you, unrealistic, which again, it is fiction. So yeah, it's not going to be very realistic. And that's the thing. It's like horror can be a lot of things. Horror can be fun. I read a book, and people will hear me say this author's name over and over again, Stephen Graham Jones. He wrote a book about a teenage slasher. And what was so interesting about this book, mind you, this book is an emotional roller coaster. The last 2 chapters, I could barely read aloud because my husband and I were both reading it because I was sobbing so much. Wow. So it's an emotional journey. Like, and that I think is what people don't realize, is that horror is way more nuanced than just gore and taboo things and violence and all of those things that you associate with horror. There's so much nuance. There's so many layers to good horror. Now, granted, I can't speak for the bad horror. There's always going to be books and movies that you're just like, wow, this is trash. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the good writing. But what was so interesting about this book is that this kid doesn't start off as a slasher. He becomes one, and it's almost like it was something that was out of his control. And so you get this perspective of what it's like for him as the kid who's becoming this killer, and it almost feels involuntary. I don't want to give too much away just in case people want to read this book, but it's kind of like if you could get into the mind of like a Mike Myers or a Jason Voorhees, just like those mindless killers that you don't think there's a lot going on up there, and see what it's like from their perspective. And he gave such interesting explanations to everything, that all the horror tropes of like, how did he get there so quickly when he's walking and she's running? How did he survive getting shot 10 times? Like, he gives a reason for every single one of those.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, it's so interesting. But you really fall in love with these characters, especially the main character, because it's something that's happening to him. And so you empathize with him in a way. And by the end of it, it's like this very emotional journey. And I think that is so much of what horror is. A lot of the horror that I particularly like deals with a lot of trauma that people don't want to look at. The deep-seated trauma that we might talk to our therapist about, or we might bury deep inside of us. We might take drugs or drink alcohol or some other destructive behavior to deal and cope with. Horror doesn't allow you to not look at the thing. It puts it right front and center for you. And it almost is like a mirror to yourself of like your own trauma. Because a lot of the things that these writers write about are real life things. A good example of that is we're reading the Buffalo Hunter right now, which is also a Stephen Graham Jones book. And it deals with a lot of his books do, because he is Indigenous, it deals with a lot of the racism and discrimination of Indigenous people and the trauma that they deal with. But it does it in a twist of some sort that includes a horror element. But the horror is just like a vehicle for the trauma. If that makes sense. This is not a spoiler, but one of the main characters in the Buffalo Hunter, he's a vampire. And what is so interesting about the way that he does vampires is that it's truly a curse. Like, there's nothing romantic about his version of the vampire. It kind of harkens back to like a Nosferatu or a Dracula, the earlier versions that were more creature-like and less human. But also there's an interesting element to this vampire where he becomes whatever he eats. So in the beginning, he was eating animals and he started to like grow horns. And so one of the things that happens, which I haven't really gotten to there yet, but I had heard about it beforehand because we went to a talk of his, which is he starts to go after buffalo hunters, which are white men. So he starts to take on the characteristics. And this is in a time in the country when racism was not only prevalent, it was blatant. And so you can imagine his sort of own disgust of taking on the characteristics of the people that hate you, that tried to kill you, that discriminate against you. And so in order to stay himself, he has to feed on his own people. And that's what that's what makes the curse, is that's what makes it truly like intense and deplorable, is that you become what you eat. All of that to say, it's like, it's not just a simple vampire story. There's so much more to it. It deals with very difficult subjects, and a lot of good horror does deal with a lot of difficult subjects. And like I was telling you earlier with my husband, when I asked him, like, why do you like horror so much? Because I was in the same boat as a lot of people of like the stigma of it. And he's just like, it's cathartic. It allows him to face his trauma in a way that feels not so scary. It allows him to feel not so alone in some of the things that he's gone through in his childhood. And so it's so much deeper, especially because one of the other main taboos is that if you like horror, then you're a sick person. That you are somehow
mentally dark and in dark places, and
that you are also dark and twisty, when in fact a lot of the people that read horror that I've encountered are the complete opposite. They're very well adjusted.
Well, if I may say, I like hearing what Nick had to say, because my brother was a huge horror buff, not a book reader, but all the old classic horror movies. He loved Halloween. He loved Michael Myers. He like knew everything about the making of the movie, the actors, the lore, what happened behind the scenes. Like, that was his passion. And we never fully understood, why does he love horror so much? Like, because again, my brother had an accident when he was younger, so mentally he was always younger than his actual age. So he was very, kid-hearted. And then here he is, like, watching all this gory horror, and he loved it, and he had all the movies and recorded all the stuff. So it was interesting, because I always wondered, what was it? And granted, I don't think it was maybe for the same reasons, but it is interesting to hear where someone is coming from on what attracts them to horror. And I'll discuss this later on, but it reminds me of why there are women who love dark romance. And those are the exact reasons. A lot of these women who were sexually assaulted read dark romance because it's cathartic for them. It's almost like they can take back the power. And it's actually healed so many women from their past abuse. So that is interesting that he feels that way about horror.
It's so true. Like, it does allow you to confront your own trauma in a way that feels safe. Yeah. Because you're not having to spill your guts to anybody. You're not even really having to face it directly. It's almost like facing it in an indirect way, because you're living vicariously through these characters who are going through it. So, like, for example, I'm very sensitive to racism, to discrimination, because I have personally dealt with it, and I am a person of color. So anytime racism occurs, even if it's happening to somebody I don't even know, it affects me, it touches me, it hurts me as if it was happening to me. So reading it in this book, I feel a connection to this author in a way that maybe not everybody feels, because I know what that feeling is. I know what it's like to belong to a people group that is discriminated against, that is stereotyped, that is lied on, essentially. I mean, it's happening right now in our country with immigrants, and a lot of those immigrants come
Hispanic immigrants.
Exactly. They come from Hispanic countries. And I don't think of myself in any different way just because I am a US citizen, that I am somehow better or different, or that if a police officer or an ICE officer or anybody that has a certain opinion about immigrants would look at me and somehow see me in a different light than they see somebody who is not native born. They would see me the exact same way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so again, to read that, and a lot of times they're dealt with in a way that it feels like a vindication, especially when the bad person, because oftentimes in life, you don't get to see that karmic justice enacted right away. But in a book, they always get what's coming to them, usually. Typically, there are always consequences. And so it feels very cathartic. I can see why women who have dealt with sexual assault and things like that feel that vindication, because oftentimes, and we know this statistically, the perpetrators of sexual assault, they don't get any sort of punishment for their behavior. A slap on the wrist, that's the most that they get. While the women have to deal with that trauma for the rest of their lives. In books, you get that immediate like feeling of, yes, he went down hard. And for like a second, you see your own trauma in that situation. Maybe you see the person, or maybe you see the event, and it heals something inside of you. There was a book that I read recently. I won't say the author's name because it's kind of controversial, but in the course of the book, there was a man who tried to commit sexual assault. It was a dark romance, like you said. And at the last minute, the main male protagonist saves the day. He forces this man to cut off his own penis. And it is such a rewarding scene because... and then he still kills him because he convinces him, if you will cut off your own penis, I will let you live, because he kills everybody else. He watches this man do it to himself. He does it to himself, and then as he's trying to leave, he shoots him and kills him anyway. And how often does that sort of vindication happen in real life? Never.
0.00001% maybe.
It's sad that you have to get that through a fictional book, but if that's a way that you can heal any part of yourself that was traumatized by something like that, I mean, go for it.
Yeah.
Healing is hard to come by as it is.
For real.
So yes, I think that horror can be very healing, can help you deal with your trauma, and it can be elevated. It doesn't have to be, just all slash and gore, and there's more substance to it than that. But what about you? Because I know we've talked a little bit about it in the past. But I know that there's more to it than just what we've talked about.
Unfortunately, there's way too much. So sadly, it's been very interesting because romance has been one of the top selling genres. It'll either be the actual top selling genre or it's like the second, but it's pretty much one or the other. And it's been like that for decades. It's sad that for whatever, we know many reasons why, but for all the reasons that are what they are, it has always had this attack against its validity as just literature or reading material or just whether it's worthy of anything, to the point that other writers of other genres, they're angry and they are upset that the romance shouldn't be as best-selling and shouldn't be as popular and shouldn't be making so much money because it's not worthy, and they list their pathetic reasons why. And usually it's because they're mad because whatever genre they write in, they're not selling books. So it's just interesting and sad that as readers and writers of the genre, there are so many stigmas against it. And till this day, we are still trying to fight for our place in the industry. And sometimes, randomly enough, even the publishing industry, we are making them so much money, they don't back us up in the same way, which is also something as authors we have to constantly fight for. And so again, one of the stigma and myths, is that it's not serious literature. That's what romance, which you have seen with horror as well. Yeah. And the thing with that I find interesting on that excuse is that romance explores complex emotional journeys between two people. There's so many variations of life experiences you can read of different people throughout the romance genre. There's personal growth, there's trauma, there's resilience, there's character-driven stories. It's interesting that they want to deem the genre not literature, because a lot of times anything that is called or deemed literature, they all have the same elements. At the end of the day, at the core, they're to make you feel something. And every genre does that in different ways. Every genre has their place. Then we have the whole, it's just sex. Or those that don't have sex scenes on the page, it's just fluff. So it's not serious, it's dumb, it's cheesy, it's chick porn.
We that jaded as a society, like for real, like that we cannot even appreciate simple things, or we view simple things, and I don't mean simple in a derogatory way, but we view something that
simple
is
pleasures, like that's
a simple pleasure as being beneath us in some type of way. Like, it has to be so complex in order to be appreciated.
Yes.
Cry me a river.
Exactly. So it's annoying because, again, even with sex on the page, the heart of the genre still is about connection and growth and a journey and a story. Even because, again, people also don't understand that there is erotica. That's a genre.
Right.
And then there's romance. It's a separate genre. They are not the same. Right. So yes, erotic romance and the erotic genre, because those are also two separate, erotic romance and erotica, they focus very much on sex on the page. And that's what you're getting with that. When it comes to romance, even with the spiciest sex scenes on the page, that's maybe 5-10% max of an entire book. True. You are reading way more about the character and the main character's arc and story. It just so happens, like real life with relationships, that people have sexual experiences, and some romance authors choose to write that on the page and some don't. And that's in equal measure, they both have their place. So it's ridiculous reducing romance novels to just porn. That pisses me off so much. I hate that.
I know.
It's dismissive and it is inaccurate, because while many romance novels include steamy scenes, they, again, are more than that. And that is not the majority of the story. The focus isn't just even the physical acts when you are reading sex scenes on the page. It's on why those acts matter to the character. Even a character who maybe is having a one-night stand. It's not about the one-night stand.
What is the reasoning behind it?
What led them to that? And then what leads them after. The intimacy aspect of sexual relations between two characters can mean so many things, and it adds to the story and the character's arc. It's not just placed there for the sake of being placed there. So it's really, yeah.
Can I ask a question about that? Because
absolutely.
I'm always looking for like the deeper reasoning. It feels like even the way that we view porn, because let's face it, pornography, like actual pornography, is geared towards men. It always has been. And yes, there has been a little bit of a stigma with it, especially if it becomes like an addiction. But for the most part, we accept the fact that men watch porn way more than we accept the fact that women may also participate and watch in porn, because women are so objectified that they can only be objects participating in porn for the pleasure of men.
Exactly.
Not for their own pleasure, their own desire. So the fact is that many people enjoy romance, both men and women, but it is a female-dominated genre, which I think is a lot of the reason why it gets all the shit that it gets. Because had it been male-dominated, nobody would bat an eye at it, because we expect men to be sexual. We expect them to participate in sexual endeavors, whether that's just reading a book or actually going out and having a physical act. But with women, oh no, that's taboo, especially when it's geared toward women, which most romance books are, whether they have sex on the page or not. They're geared towards women and their emotions. A lot of even the male characters are written in a way that would be attractive to women. And that is just not okay for a lot of people. That women have their own thing that is geared towards them and is not for the male gaze. And so do you think that that's the reason why they label it negatively as pornography? They belittle it because it's a women-dominated industry or genre.
At the end of the day, that is the core argument of this. It's misogyny and the patriarchy. It's because it's for women. It's mostly written by women. Women are involved, so let's put it down. It's not worthy. Sit down, submit. That's not allowed. There's someone on Threads. Their name is Rose Graceling Moore. They're an author, I believe. They were saying, why does the inclusion of these scenes, which are sex scenes, make a romance novel less, but makes Game of Thrones award-winning? For example, why are intense sex scenes in film and TV lauded only when they are in male demographic properties, which is exactly what you were asking and making a point of. It is okay when it is in any male-dominated format. As soon as a woman is involved, in charge, the creator of something and the consumer of something, now we have a problem. Now it's not worthy. Now it's less than, it's insignificant, and it's belittled. And that, unfortunately, at the end of the day, is the only reason why romance genre stays pretty much bogged down by these stigmas. And no matter that it is one of the top gross selling genres in the industry, no matter that even in media and film, it always ends up being popular and makes a lot of money, no matter what. It's like it tries to be on top as it deserves, and they step on it and go, no, know your place. You're not allowed to be better than Game of Thrones because that male made it. And it's always...
We already got backlash for that.
I know. And here's the thing. I'm going to keep bringing it up because at the end of the day, it is a great example of how it was such a phenomenon on TV and books for years, and people will defend it with their full chest. They will die on that hill. And I'm like, but do you understand the double standard that is so clear as day? You can feel how you feel about those books. That's fine, because at the end of the day, art is subjective. The human experience is subjective. And luckily, there is something for everyone. And we should celebrate that instead of trying to peg down what's greater, what's better, what's worthy, what's not. That's ridiculous. But unfortunately, yes, I'm going to keep bringing up Game of Thrones because it's a double standard. He, as a male author, it's perfectly okay that he gets to have sex on the page of all varieties, like incest and whatnot. No one bats an eye at that. But if a female wrote it, they would drag it through the ground.
Yeah. I think that's because the comments that we got from it, the argument that people had was that Game of Thrones is so much more than the sex, that it's amazing storytelling, that it's very intricately woven. There is so much history and lore. And I get that. First of all, a lot of these people that were commenting, I doubt has ever read a romance book in their life.
Of course.
So for them to say that somehow Game of Thrones is better storytelling than any romance book, while that might be true for a lot of books in general, just because, yes, it does take a lot of lore, story building, world building to create that story. It's not so much about the fact that it's good writing. I can't say for sure because I've watched Game of Thrones, but I've never read any of the books. And in fact, I was told by people who read the book that the books are actually more graphic in a lot of the ways. Of the sex scenes are longer and more graphic than they are on TV. And maybe that's because you go deep into the descriptions of the sexual acts, and so it feels more intense. But the point isn't so much that we're comparing the storytelling. The point is that if a woman had written Game of Thrones, the storytelling, while being amazing, would have been overshadowed by the fact that there was so much sex. And people, in order to belittle her work, because people have done it to all kinds of female authors. I may not like J.K. Rowling or agree with her viewpoints, especially on trans people, but many people have attacked her writing and have gone after her writing just because the fact that she's a woman, and they cannot fathom that a woman is capable of writing this fantasy novel that was so popular, that had such amazing world building, that became a phenomenon. So again, it's more of the fact that sex on the page should not overshadow the storytelling. And when it comes to romance, it always does. And people half the time don't even know what the story is, and they already judge it just because it's in the romance genre.
And that's it. And that's the only reason. That's at the end what our point was when it came to posting what we did on also social media, where a lot of people sounded off in defense. It had nothing to do exactly. It had nothing to do with the validity or just the quality of the storytelling. It was just the point that it's okay because he is male, and a female, it's not okay. That's just plain and simple in society. Because romance, there are fantasy romance authors who build just as intricate worlds and create some epic fantasies just as well, that just so happen that their characters come together. And again, exploring just human nature, two people find intimacy in whatever that looks like on the page. That's just one of the many tools we use when it comes to storytelling in regards to the romance genre. And so in every form, it's not about how good a story is. People don't even look at that. They just automatically call smut. And there's argument about, well, then why do you claim it's smut? You're pretty much doing the same disservice. Here's the thing with that. There are some authors who write romance who don't like using that term because of what, it implicates.
Yeah.
But the ones who do, it's because they're taking the power back in the word.
Oh, totally.
And that is why they will proudly say, yeah, I write smut and I read smut. Because you want to belittle it and minimize what it is. We're not going to let you take this word and try to put your foot down against the genre.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, what is the point? The point is to make it less popular. The point is to discourage people from reading it, from writing it. And I think in taking the power back in it, which we've seen with a lot of derogatory terms, you are saying yeah, I'm not ashamed of this. I'm proud of this. And I'm going to continue to write it and I'm going to continue to read it. And there ain't shit that you can do about it. So go ahead and bitch and complain in the corner and have your little pity party and be upset because you're not selling as many books as a lot of these romance authors are. It's not my problem. I'll wipe my tears with my money.
Exactly.
With my dollar bills, y'all. I do think it's a little hypocritical because so much of the way that society views women are these like purity. They're not to be sexual. They're not to be vulgar in any type of sexual way. On the one hand, that's what we're told that we're supposed to be. So when a lot of women read romance, it isn't just about the sex on the page. They need more than that. They need emotional connection. They need a story. They need a journey. And yeah, while they might get enjoyment out of sex on the page, it's more than that. So on the one side, you're being told, oh, you're pure and you're not sexual beings. Women are not sexual beings. They're nurturers, they're caretakers. So wouldn't you automatically assume that if a woman is interested in a genre, that there's more to it than sex? But yet at the same time, because it's female dominated and because it caters towards women, the only way to make it less than and to bring it down a peg is by saying it's just about the sex and it's just smut and it's just this and da 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 da, which is a lot of way that women are shamed into doing or not doing things is by putting it in that category as being vulgar, because women are not supposed to be vulgar and they're not supposed to, you know, give into their sexual desires or enjoy self-pleasure or enjoy pleasure, period, because it's not pure.
And I think there are so many, obviously, facets. One of them being that it's also making women really successful. And that threatens men and society. Two, the fact that women are finally learning and claiming their own sexuality, because we've unfortunately lived, even till recently, a lot of women are sexually repressed because we're not properly educated about our bodies. We're not encouraged to explore or be sexual of any nature because we're bogged down with the narrative that we have to be pure creatures that only are allowed to bloom when we are catered to a man who chooses us, and then he leads and knows everything and you have to learn from him. And
or in the deep darkness where nobody can see.
Exactly. And at the end, what has that led to? A lot of women who men took advantage of them not knowing their own bodies, not knowing that they too were supposed to experience pleasure during a sexual act. The fact that men don't even know where to find certain parts in a woman's body. And so there are so many factors that men and the patriarchy have wanted to keep within that. The rise of romance, whenever it keeps rising throughout the decades, I feel like they keep doing this. And the fact that it's 2025 and it's still happening, it's like, no, you can't know too much, because now we're feeling empowered. Romance
it's control.
Novels, it's absolutely control. And romance novels have given women the power back that they deserve of their own autonomy, you know, and unfortunately that's discouraged. And so romance novels threaten that. So they have to keep knocking it down. Pretty much.
It's interesting because horror and romance, oddly enough, share a lot of stigmas. They're not viewed as being legitimate literature. They're viewed as being second rate or kitschy or taboo for some reason. For you, it's because of the sexual nature. For horror, it's because of the violence and the gore that may accompany it. I think, too, a lot of people fail to see that the horror elements and the romance elements, whether sexual or otherwise, are just a vehicle for the actual storytelling. And that they're just a small portion of it, even though it is the genre. But it's really more nuanced than that. And I think people miss the nuance aspects of both genres. And then the other one that I had just thought of too, that I think is also something that romance can relate to. I think when people are into horror, it's assumed that they themselves will become violent, will become perpetrators of violence and violent acts, that they are, like you said, dark and twisted, that they have some sort of dark nature. And I think with romance, which is not true, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them are so boringly normal and well-adjusted and are in therapy because they understand and have a unique relationship with trauma that other people don't. They're willing to face trauma in a more unique way than other people. But with romance, the assumption is if you read romance, then you are a overly sexual person out doing all sorts of things all the time.
And that's just steamy romance, because again, there's a whole world of clean
but
romance.
when people hear romance, they're thinking that you're either super sexual or you're living in a fairy tale dreamland of unrealistic expectations.
Yes. That's also one of the stigmas, that the whole happy endings is too radical and ridiculous, because there are love stories that are out there that you read. That doesn't mean it's a romance novel, because in the industry, one of the rules as an author is, if it's considered a romance book, it has to have a happily ever after between the characters. If it doesn't, then it's a love story and it's not under the romance category. And so the fact that romance novels have happily ever afters, that's also one of the things that is made fun of. And the fact is, people in a world filled with such cynicism, promising that love wins in the end is actually revolutionary, because with everything that we face on a daily basis, that we can have a place, a safe place to escape, where romance is not avoiding conflict. It's just insisting that people can overcome things together. It's taking you on this beautiful journey that at the end of the day, you close that book and you can exhale and feel good about.
You do feel good.
Yes. And that's a wonderful feeling that I don't understand why it's frowned upon to have this beautiful tool that we can run to in our safe space whenever we want to, while we face the difficulties of this world that everyone faces in various ways. Like, how is that wrong? Because escapism is not bad. It's not a weakness. All fiction offers escape. Every genre offers escape. And again,
all media does.
All media, exactly. And in this chaotic world, I think it's a powerful self-care tool that we have a place that we can go and feel satisfied and good at the end of the day. That shouldn't be something that is frowned upon. It should be celebrated.
I agree with you. I think it's the same mentality that people have when somebody has a dream and they want to pursue it, and you have those people that are like, well, you got to be realistic and you got to think of this and you got to think of that, and if everybody
pop.
Right. And if everybody allowed themselves to be dissuaded by the naysayers of, oh, you got to be realistic, not everybody can become this, or not everybody can, there would be so many people that would have given up on their dreams, that would have never accomplished the things that they would have accomplished. There's so much art that we would have never had had so-and-so not been like, well, I understand that it's hard, and I understand that I'm going to hear a lot of no's, and I understand that it's going to be challenging, but I really want to do this and I'm not going to give up. I think people who are the naysayers are the ones that like, oh, well, I want to bring this person back down to earth, or I want to drop them a peg. Those are people that are really just not happy in their life. Because let me tell you, happy people, they don't go around trying to make other people unhappy. They're too busy being happy. But miserable people, hence misery loves company, they are only too happy to point out all the potentially bad things that can happen, or all the negative things that can happen, in order to bring that person down to their level. Romance is the quintessential genre of happy, like you said, happy endings. No, a lot of the times we don't get those happy endings in life. Sometimes we do. There have been plenty of people who have had romances that have lasted to the end of their life and have been like, this person was my soulmate. We spent 40, 50, 60 years together. We look at those stories as being rare, and they are. But even more so because of their rarity. Why not have a place that you can go to where there's always a happy ending? There's always a feel-good emotion when you're done. We have so many things in this world that make us feel like shit all the time. Why try to take away the few things that can make us feel good consistently on a regular basis?
Like, how does it affect you? How
doesn't.
does it affect you that people choose to read romance? What is it doing against you in your life? Absolutely nothing. And again,
No.
it goes back to one, what you were saying. Unhappy
Mhm.
people want the same company, so
Mhm.
got to make everybody else unhappy. And two, again, the attack is misogyny and the patriarchy, because women are not allowed to have their thing. Women are not allowed to be empowered. And this is a women dominated genre industry, and it's successful. It
That,
is
to be
so
honest,
successful.
men can't keep up with.
No.
In terms of like writing this genre, I have not. And granted, some people may argue that men are not out there trying to write romance.
There
I don't
are
think that that's
some.
true.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. But for the female gaze, for the audience that mostly consumes romance as a genre, you need to cater to their wants and needs. So a lot of males don't really understand what women really like, because it takes studying women and asking them questions and understanding them to really get it. Now, I have seen a lot of like book talk men who they've made their whole shtick on social media being a book boyfriend. And they seem to kind of understand what is so appealing about a lot of these books, and have read a lot of these books too. It's like the Sarah J. Maas books and so many other, granted, that's fantasy romance. I get that, but like have read a lot of the romance and have understood some of the tropes of book boyfriends, some of the things that are appealing about them, and have sort of taken on those characteristics, or have talked about why this is so appealing to women. But I mean, as we've seen, even within your editing job that you've done before, even sexually, some men don't really understand how a woman's body works. And so they end up writing things that are completely unrealistic.
Yeah.
And it's completely for the male gaze.
Yeah.
A woman gets so wet that she just floods herself.
She needs a pad. I've literally read this, guys. She had a pad on because she was so wet. She flooded her underwear.
Yeah. And for a male reading that, he's like, yeah.
We're like, that's not science. That's not how that works. Let's be real. After 50 Shades, the spicy romance genre really skyrocketed because people were feeling more confident to write it and read it now. And it has empowered women. Before, women didn't even know what they wanted to ask for it. And now women are demanding what brings them pleasure because a lot of men just haven't known. They haven't either tried, cared, or weren't educated. And here is this genre that is empowering women to own who they are, what they want, as we all deserve, and no matter your gender. And so it's something that, again, only because it threatens anything that has to do with the patriarchy, it just needs to be brought down. And it's sad that we're still on the same narrative today. And we're almost going backwards just in the last few months, but that's a whole topic for another day, if at all.
Well, because the way that patriarchy goes and the way that misogyny goes is the way that these things will continue to be treated.
There is so much that we could say on both aspects of the horror genre and the romance genre. At the end of the day, we all like what we like. There's nothing wrong with diverse interests. You can love one thing and it may not be my cup of tea, and vice versa, and that is okay. We all don't have to be clones who all read the same thing, consume the same thing. That's the beauty of art, guys. There is something for everyone. And thank goodness that there is such variety that everyone can find something they connect to. And that's what art is. It's connecting us on a deeper level to feel things.
And at the end of the day, not everything is meant to be highbrow and super intellectual and conceptualized. And I'm glad that it's not. I'm glad that there is more variety. There is more spice to life than that. The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, it's just human beings that decide what is superior and what is not. And that's a decision that you should make for yourself. You shouldn't allow anybody else to make it for you. So hopefully this episode encourages you to try romance if you've been interested in it but have stayed away because of the stigma. And the same thing with horror. Try it. You never know.
So friends, thank you so much for listening. We were passionate. There was a few rants that went off, especially me. As a romance writer, unfortunately, I'm in the deep end of dealing with the stigmas and all that fun stuff.
As always, we want to start a conversation in the comments section of YouTube, of Threads, TikTok, and Instagram. TikTok seems to be the place with the most engagement, but we would love to hear on any platform that you are watching or listening to this podcast. What is a genre that you really like that may have some stigmas against them as well? We would love to hear about it. We would love to be educated, because there's a lot of genres that I don't read, but am sort of intrigued by. Like true crime is one of them that I think a lot of people accept, but there might be some stigmas against them that I don't really know about. So please do share. If you are a fellow horror or romance fan, hopefully this episode you can relate to, but if you have any other stigmas that we have not covered that you would like to share as well, things that you've encountered in your own reading or writing, please do share them as well. There might be a follow-up to this. You never know. We're always interested in talking about books. Yes. I'll tell you that. Go ahead and comment. We will definitely be in the comment section of all of our platforms, engaging, responding. I respond to pretty much every TikTok. I'm a little bit behind on YouTube, so I got to get on that. But if you do comment on YouTube, I will be sure to get on it and respond to that.
And I'm also been helping on the YouTube front. I was sick for a week, so I'm also behind. We will catch up though.
We will.
Friends, speaking of, if you are on YouTube or if you're on another platform and listening to this podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, follow, do all the things. And especially if you can leave us a review on any of the podcast platforms, that would be fantastic. That would help us in the algorithm so that others who would like our content can also find us. Thank you so much for another fantastic week here at the Perpetually Overdue Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.